Welcome to our session, the End of Course Examination Program for English 2 Text-Dependent Writing, to persuade through argument. This session aligns with the recently released English 2 TDW Sampler. Today we will look at available English 2 resources, and then we will explore argumentative writing and our released student responses. Because we are using resources from our webpage today, we will first look at how to locate assessment resources for English 2. Let's visit the Assessment Quick Links for Teachers webpage. You may find this page by going to our main SCDE website and choosing for educators, or you may simply use the search term SCDE Assessment Quick Links for Teachers. Once you arrive at the Quick Links page, scroll down to find EOCEP English 2 Writing Component. Click here. Here you will see introductory material about the writing component for the end of course exam for English 2. Let's look at some of the important information. Students in English 2 will receive and respond to either an argumentative TDW task or an informative TDW task. The mode of writing will not be announced prior to testing. The fall administration of the exam may assess in a mode that is different from the spring administration or that is the same as the spring administration. If teachers are providing instruction in all modes of writing, students will be prepared. As an additional reminder, all 3 modes of writing will be assessed through standalone items on the EOC exam for English 2. Please revisit the test blueprint for more details. For more support understanding the TDW scoring rubrics and how the TDW items and rubrics were designed, please watch Transitioning from TDA to TDW. Also new in 2024 are the writer's checklists. The checklists are now mode-specific and will be placed just beneath the TDW item during the test. To see how this appears on the testing platform, please visit the End of Course Examination Program online tools training. Because the scoring of the TDW item is very intensive, teachers and content experts served on TDW range finding committees this past summer to create anchor sets for half of the field-tested TDW items. Additional teacher committees will work in summer of 2025 to create anchor sets for the other half of the items. Because of this, we are only able to release some TDW samplers this school year and the remainder next school year. This year, we are releasing an argumentative task for English 2, an informative task for 8th grade, an argumentative task for 6th grade, and a narrative prompt for 3rd grade. The release of an argumentative task this year does not indicate that the operational item on the fall and/or spring administrations of the test will be argumentative. To preview an informational task for English 2, please refer to the Online Training Tools, or OTT. English 2 teachers may also want to examine the 8th grade informational task once it is released. Today we will use the TDW sample papers that are color-coded in the color-coded visual aid document. The complete sampler with full annotations is included in the TDW sampler document. The color coding in the version we are using today is based on the annotations. but do not reflect all annotations. To persuade through argument. If you watched the original webinar transitioning from TDA to TDW, you learned that the TDW tasks are very different from the TDA items. The TDW tasks and rubrics are tightly aligned to our 2024 ELA standards. This was very intentionally designed because we want to put the focus on teaching the writing process and not teaching to a test item. Let's take a quick look at some of the specifics related to the TDW item before we look at our grade level argumentative writing indicator. The purpose of argumentative writing is to persuade the reader to think, feel, believe, or do something. The TDW item provides the student with the purpose of persuading the reader of the student's perspective. This means that for this item, the student must choose one side of the issue. Also for this test item, the test will provide the student with a text or texts. This looks different from classroom instruction that involves the student researching and evaluating sources on the topic before beginning the writing process. Here we see the grade level indicator for ELA E2C 1.1 argumentative writing. Pay close attention to the language in red. This is the academic language of argumentative writing and is used in the TDW scoring rubric. Refer to the original video transitioning from TDA to TDW for a more detailed explanation. Again, we see the academic language that is used in the standards and in the TDW rubric. Here, I would like to call your attention to tone, style, audience, and purpose. The 2024 ELA standards emphasize purpose and audience more so than the 2015 writing standards did. It is imperative that English 2 writing instruction provides support for students in determining how the purpose interacts with the tone and style of a written piece, as well as the importance of the audience. Here you see the released argumentative TDW task. Notice that the topic is provided for students. As part of the argumentative writing process, students must choose a side or position and make a claim. Students must use evidence from the provided text to support their claim. Unlike the TDA item, the TDW task encourages students to incorporate their own ideas as well. Being able to bring in their own ideas as supporting evidence or as elaboration may impact the student's voice in their writing. Just as in the grade level indicator, English 2 students are expected to acknowledge and refute a counterclaim in their written response. For more information about how the refutation may be different in the TDW response versus in classroom writing, please watch the original TDW webinar transitioning from TDA to TDW. Although the task does not name transitional words and phrases, the rubric and the grade level indicator do. Transitional words and phrases are a vital part of the argumentative writing process because they help students structure and organize the response. Additionally, transitional language establishes a relationship between claims, counterclaims, reasons, and evidence as outlined in ELA E2C 1.1b and C. While the TDW task provides the topic and purpose, it may or may not provide the audience. This particular task provides the audience of the school board, which means students should consider what language and tone they would use with a school board as compared to another audience such as their parents or friends. The concluding section or statement is emphasized in the TDW rubric and the grade level indicator because it allows the student to re-emphasize his or her claim and stress why it is the logical conclusion. Unlike the TDA, TDW is not formulaic. There is no need to unpack the item because not all items look alike. The items used for text-dependent writing are based on the grade level indicator for that mode of writing. Teaching the writing process is what will prepare students for the assessment. Again, we must teach students the process of writing an argument, not writing a test item. If we teach the writing process, we are preparing students for the test. The TDW items were intentionally designed to closely align with the writing standards so that teachers can focus on instruction instead of test prep. Before we look at specific elements in the student samples, you will need access to the color-coded sample responses. You may wish to pause here while you access the document. The introduction of the color-coded document reminds teachers that not all annotations in the TDW sampler are included in the color-coded document. Teachers are highly encouraged to read the full annotations in the TDW sampler. As we look at claim and counterclaim, you will need to access the color-coded papers for Sample 1, Score Point 6, Sample 2, Score Point 5, and Sample 1, Score Point 4. For now, you will only need the yellow and green color-coded versions of these responses. You may wish to pause while you locate these samples. Before we jump into claim, let's revisit scoring. The TDW responses are scored holistically, which means the reader is taking into account the entire response and what the student does well. A holistic rubric is not designed to provide detailed feedback. It is designed to judge the overall quality of a written work. The maximum number of points possible for the English 2 TDW is 6 points. Your English teacher eyes have probably noticed the misspelled words in this paragraph. You may have even questioned how this student received a 6 with this many spelling errors. Don't panic. This is considered a rough draft. In the classroom, students are allowed the opportunity to rewrite papers after making revisions and edits. On the end of course exam, they are not allowed this opportunity. Because of this, spelling only affects the score if it impedes the reader from understanding the response. There are examples of non-scorable papers in the TDW sampler document. Also consider that students are using an online platform that does not have spell check to tell them if they have misspelled or even mistyped a word. Because we are still able to fluently read this paragraph, even with the misspellings, the student's score is not impacted. If the student had the opportunity to receive feedback and revise this paper before submitting it, the spelling errors would have more of an impact. But the student does not have that opportunity. This is a rough draft. For those of you who may be concerned about the state of writing instruction based on this item, please be assured that our tests also assess grammar, mechanics, and punctuation through standalone items on the end of course assessment. Notice the student's use of rhetorical questions. In the full annotation, this is noted as a strength. Does this mean that all students must begin their TDW responses with a rhetorical question to receive a score of 6? No. This student uses rhetorical questions skillfully throughout the response to strengthen the claim. The skillful incorporation of rhetorical questions in this response enhance the student's style and voice. As part of writing instruction, you may wish to teach students how to use rhetorical questions effectively. However, this does not mean they are a required part of argumentative writing. This student also provides an acknowledgement of an alternative perspective before presenting his or her claim. Because this high-scoring paper does this, does not mean that all high-scoring papers must include this. Notice the precision of this student's claim. While I'm not showing the full response, you will notice in the color-coded version you are looking at that this student supports his or her claim throughout the entire response. Presenting a strong claim in the introduction and then straying away from that claim in the rest of the response does not enhance the writing. The instructional focus here should begin with writing a precise claim. It should then move into how to stay on topic and support the claim throughout the entire response. This is not just needed for the TDW item. This is part of argumentative writing. This is an effective introduction. Let's move to the paper that received a score of 5. This student also uses a rhetorical question. Let me again remind you that this is not a magic formula for a successful response. Not all students can effectively incorporate rhetorical questions. Do not make this a requirement for argumentative writing. As you look at the full response, you will notice this student uses rhetorical questions throughout as a natural part of his or her writing style. In the score point 6 response, the student mentions the opposing viewpoint before introducing his or her claim. Here in the score point 5, the student effectively uses original thinking that stems from the text. The student is showing a contrast between sports and video games before stating his or her claim. We will look at the two claims side by side, but notice this claim is focused and strong, but it is not as precise as the score point 6 response. I would also like to call your attention to the fact that the score point 6 and the score point 5 responses do not take the same position on this topic. The student's choice of phrasing also affects the precision of his or her claim. Later in the response, the student states video gaming should just be another high school club. If this statement were incorporated into the claim, it would strengthen it. In the score point 4 introduction, the student begins by introducing the text and providing a short summary. Although intended to be a claim, this is unclear because the student does not directly state if video games should be considered a sport or not. The student only states that schools should emphasize sports instead of games. The reader is unable to determine exactly which position the student is taking. When we look at all three claims together, we notice the highest scoring claim is precise and includes transitional words that show the contrasting relationship between the opposing viewpoint mentioned in the third sentence and the student's claim. In the score point 5, we notice the writing is not as skillful, but the student does use some sentence variety to add interest to his or her introduction. The lowest scoring response has an unclear claim and lacks the style and voice of the first two introductions. Based on what we have looked at so far, let's consider writing instruction. If these three students were in your class, how would you support them? Would the support be the same for each student? What might instruction look like for the writer of the score point 4 response? Reflect on your answers about the instructional needs of these students and then consider what would be of more benefit to you during instruction: the argumentative writing indicators or the TDW rubric. Would your instruction focus on the process of writing a precise claim and developing it throughout the response, or would it focus on a test item? Using the same student responses, let's look at what is in green: counterclaim. The score point 6 response includes a counterclaim, evidence that further explains it, and refutes the counterclaim by explaining why it is an incorrect assumption. Additionally, you will notice more green areas highlighted in the student's response. This student skillfully weaves the opposing view throughout his or her entire paper instead of only mentioning it in one paragraph. The student does this effectively because he or she is working throughout the entire response to prove why the opposing viewpoint is an incorrect assumption. In the score point 5 paper, the student acknowledges a counterclaim, provides evidence that further explains it, and explains why the counterclaim is incorrect. You will immediately notice there is no blue text in the score point 4. That is because while the student provides a counterclaim and some elaboration, he or she does not explain why the opposing viewpoint is incorrect. Also, because the student's claim is unclear, his or her counterclaim is also unclear. Because the claim is weak in the introduction, this response is written more like a compare-contrast response than an argumentative response. What instruction is needed to support each of these students in the argumentative writing process? If the student who wrote the score point 4 response is struggling to write a clear claim, is that student ready to move into writing a counterclaim? What support might the writer of the score point 5 response need to move into the 6 range? Is this support tied to a test item or to writing instruction? Next, we will look at evidence and elaboration. You may want to pause this recording while you locate the pink highlighted responses for Sample 1 Score Point 6, Sample 1 Score Point 5, and Sample 2 Score Point 4. In the score point 6 response, you will notice this paragraph highlighted in pink. One of the questions we have received about the TDW rubric is, do students need to include summary, paraphrasing, and elaboration, or just one of these? This response illustrates the skillful incorporation of all three. The student is pulling information from the text, which he or she then paraphrases and elaborates on using his or her own ideas. Sometimes with the TDA item, we taught students to use a formula when incorporating text evidence. We will see this with the score point 4 response. But here, we don't see a formula. We see a student who is able to weave in paraphrasing, text evidence, and original thought without simply dumping in a quote and explaining why it is important. Instruction is key. In the score point 5 response, you will notice this paragraph highlighted in pink. This student obviously has a lot of additional knowledge about gaming that he or she incorporates into the response. Not all students will have this additional knowledge about the topic, but they are encouraged to bring in that knowledge when they have it. Notice that the score point 6 student did not have the additional knowledge and still received a higher score. This is because that student incorporates text evidence and elaborates on the evidence with his or her own original thoughts derived from the text. Another element of this response I would like you to notice is how the student uses a variety of sentences and sentence beginnings to aid the audience in reading the response. If the student had used the same sentence beginnings over and over, how would that impact the audience? In the score point 4 response, you notice a pattern. The student only uses direct quotes. How does this impact the audience? What instruction is needed to help the writer of the score point 4 move beyond using only direct quotes as evidence? Is this better supported by writing instruction or by teaching a formula for a test item? Do the skills of incorporating text evidence and elaboration extend beyond argumentative writing? Next, we will look at transitions. For this section, you will need the blue highlighted responses for Sample 1 Student Score Point 6, Sample 1 Student Score Point 5, and Sample 2 Student Score Point 4. You may want to pause this video while you access these resources. As mentioned earlier, transitional language has multiple functions in writing. Let's look at how our student writers use transitions in their responses. You'll notice the writer of the score point 6 response links together the claim, counterclaim, which is not pictured in this example, and reasons and evidence. Notice too that the writer varies his or her sentence beginning and types to aid the audience in reading the response. The student of the score point 5 brings in outside information to support his or her claim. Although there are not as many transitional words and phrases highlighted in this section as in the previous sample, the student uses a variety of phrasing at the beginning of each sentence to aid the audience in reading the response. The student also links together ideas in one sentence to the next to enhance his or her overall argument. The student writer of Score Point 4 uses a formulaic approach. He or she begins with "the text states," followed by a direct quote, and then a sentence explaining why the cited evidence is important. By doing this, the student focuses less on persuading the audience of his or her position and more on explaining what the text might be saying. You can see in this paragraph that the student is incorporating a writing formula that doesn't quite work for this type of writing. This is what can happen when our instruction focuses on writing to a test item instead of teaching the writing process. While some students need more structure than others, students also need to learn that not all writing structures work with all modes of writing. This is one of those cases. By looking at all three paragraphs side by side, we can see how the use of transitional words and phrases and the incorporation of student thinking and elaboration impact the response. How do we teach students to use transitional language based on their purpose for writing? Is this best taught by teaching students to respond to a test item, or is it best taught by providing students with practice writing different types of pieces in different structures and modes? How can we help students write arguments? Students need practice with mentor text to include media. They need time to examine the parts of an argument in others' works so they can begin implementing it into their own writing. Some students will need more support than others. Some will need extensive practice learning how to write a claim. Others will need support in refining their voice and style through word choice and sentence variety. All students need practice writing arguments. Again, some students will need more explicit instruction than others. If we teach the writing process as outlined by the writing standards, we are preparing our students for argumentative writing on the end of course exam. Informational writing. English 2 teachers may access an informational TDW task in the EOCEP Online Tools Training, also known as the OTT. This provides a sample task and passage. There are no sample papers. The 8th grade TDW sampler will provide scored annotated papers for To Inform. This resource has not yet been released. The mode of the TDW sampler does not relate to the mode of writing being assessed through the TDW item on the fall or spring administration. An English 2 TDW sampler for To Inform will be available in fall of 2025. If you want to learn more about the TDW scoring rubrics, student cognitive labs, and how the TDW item aligns to the standards, please watch the first TDW video, Transitioning from TDA to TDW. The new assessment specifications documents break down each assessed indicator for assessment. These documents provide teachers with insight on how we assess the indicators on SC Ready and the EOCEP for English 2. We encourage you to utilize these documents in your classroom. If you watch the assessment specifications recording, you will learn how the document is formatted, the purpose of each part, and how you can use the assessment specifications in your classroom. Should you have any questions, please contact Dima or Rebecca.